The dust cloud appeared first, a dark smudge against the amber wheat fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my work glove, squinting through the late afternoon sun. 37 years I'd been working this land, 22 of them since Grandpa Joe passed, and I could count on one hand the number of unexpected visitors we'd had. The black SUV looked alien against our gravel road, its pristine paint job a stark contrast to my rust-stained pickup truck. City plates. My stomach tightened as two figures emerged, a man in an expensive suit and a woman in designer jeans that had never seen a day's honest work. "You must be Marcus," the man called out, his voice carrying that particular confidence that comes with money and lawyers. "I'm David Hartwell, and this is my sister Rebecca. We're your cousins." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Cousins. I'd heard whispers about them over the years. Grandpa's brother's kids who'd moved to the city decades ago and never looked back. They'd never visited, never called, never sent so much as a Christmas card when the old man was dying. "What brings you out here?" I managed, though my throat felt dry as the dust settling around their vehicle. David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk about our inheritance, Marcus. About Grandpa's will." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Inheritance, will, words that had never mattered because this land, this life, had always been mine by right of sweat and sacrifice. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I said, setting down my tools with deliberate care. My hands were shaking slightly, and I didn't want them to see it. "Grandpa left the farm to me, fair and square." Rebecca stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. She looked uncomfortable, out of place, like a hothouse flower transplanted into wild soil. "That's what we thought too, Marcus, until we found this." She pulled out a manila envelope from her designer purse, the paper yellowed with age. My heart hammered against my ribs as David extracted what looked like legal documents. "This is a copy of our grandfather's original will," David explained, his voice taking on that lawyer-like precision. "The one filed with the county clerk's office 3 months before he died. It clearly states that the farm should be divided equally among all surviving grandchildren." I stared at the papers, the words swimming before my eyes. Equal division, all grandchildren. The blood drained from my face as the implications crashed over me like a cold wave. "But that's impossible," I whispered. "He told me. He promised me this land would be mine. I've given my whole life to this place." "We understand this must be difficult," Rebecca said, though her tone suggested she understood nothing at all. "But legally we're entitled to our share, 1/3 each." The evening breeze carried the scent of ripening wheat, the same smell that had filled my lungs every day for nearly 4 decades. This wasn't just land, it was my identity, my purpose, my grandfather's legacy flowing through my veins. "I need to see those papers properly," I said finally. That night, I sat at Grandpa's old oak kitchen table, the same one where he'd taught me to read weather patterns and calculate crop yields. The legal documents lay spread before me like accusations, each word a dagger through my certainty. The will was dated March 15th, 1998, 3 months before Grandpa died. I remembered that spring vividly. He'd been getting weaker, spending more time in his chair on the porch, watching me work the fields with eyes that held both pride and something else I couldn't quite identify. Regret, maybe, or guilt. I pulled out the will I'd always known about, the one that left everything to me. Dated June 8th, 1998, just 2 weeks before he passed. The signatures looked identical, the legal language similarly formal. But something felt wrong. The paper seemed newer somehow, despite being 25 years old. My mind raced back to those final weeks. Grandpa had been agitated, mumbling about making things right and blood being thicker than water. I'd assumed he was just rambling, the way old men do when they feel death approaching. But what if there was more to it? I walked to his old bedroom, now my own, and opened the bottom drawer of his antique dresser. Hidden beneath layers of moth-eaten sweaters, I found his personal papers, birth certificates, old photographs, and letters I'd never bothered to read. One envelope caught my attention. My name was written on it in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, along with the words, "Open only if they come asking questions." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. The letter was brief, written in Grandpa's careful script. "Marcus, if you're reading this, then David and Rebecca have finally shown up. I always knew they would, once I was gone. The will they have is real, son. I wrote it when I was feeling guilty about how I'd treated their father, my brother Thomas. We had a falling out over this very land 40 years ago, and I never made it right. But you've been the one here, Marcus. You've bled for this soil, sacrificed for it, loved it the way it deserves to be loved. The second will, the one that leaves everything to you, that's real too. I had it drawn up because I realized blood alone doesn't make family. Loyalty does. Hard work does. Love does. The key opens the old tool shed floor. Look under the third floorboard from the door. You'll find what you need to make your choice. Remember, son, sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. I trust you to know the difference. Your grandfather, Joseph Hartwell." I stared at the letter until the words blurred together. 2 wills. Both real. Both legal, probably, depending on which one was filed last. The weight of the brass key felt enormous in my palm. The tool shed stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, its weathered boards holding secrets I'd never imagined. I grabbed a flashlight and walked across the yard, my boots crunching on gravel that had been laid down by 3 generations of Hartwell men. The floorboard creaked as I pried it up, revealing a metal box that had been hidden for over 2 decades. Inside the metal box lay a treasure trove of family history I'd never known existed. Photographs of my grandfather and his brother Thomas as young men, working side by side in these very fields. Letters between them that started warm and brotherly, then grew cold and bitter over some long-forgotten dispute about money and responsibility. But it was the bank records that made my blood run cold. Detailed accounts showing that Thomas had invested heavily in the farm during the 1970s drought, pouring his city-earned money into keeping the land alive when the crops failed 3 years running. Money that had never been repaid. There was also a deed, the original deed to the property, showing Thomas as a co-owner alongside Grandpa. Somehow, over the years, Thomas's name had been quietly removed from the official records. The legal implications made my head spin. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick envelope marked "For Marcus's eyes only." Inside were more bank statements, these ones recent, showing that David and Rebecca had been struggling financially. David's law practice was failing, Rebecca was going through an expensive divorce, and they both had significant debts. But there was something else. A letter from a land development company dated just 6 months ago, expressing interest in purchasing farmland in our area for a shopping complex. The offer was astronomical, enough money to solve anyone's financial problems permanently. My hands shook as I realized the truth. This wasn't about family legacy or rightful inheritance. This was about money. Pure and simple. They wanted to sell Grandpa's farm to developers and split the profits. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a yoke I'd been born to carry. The next morning, I found David and Rebecca waiting by their SUV, dressed in fresh clothes that screamed expensive lawyers and court battles. They'd spent the night at the motel in town, probably making phone calls to attorneys and real estate agents. "We've been thinking about this situation all night," David began, his tone suggesting he was about to make me an offer he considered generous. "We understand you've put work into this place, Marcus. We're prepared to be fair." "Fair?" I asked, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Rebecca stepped forward, her smile as artificial as her manicured nails. We'll buy out your third at current market value. You can take the money and start fresh somewhere else. Maybe buy a smaller place, something more manageable for a single man. I pulled out the photographs I'd found in the box, the ones showing their father and my grandfather working together as young men. Tell me about your father, David. About Thomas. The color drained from David's face. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said quietly. Because this whole mess started with him and Grandpa, didn't it? Some fight they had 40 years ago that split the family apart. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. Our father never talked about this place. He said it brought back too many painful memories. Painful because Grandpa cheated him out of his share, I continued, watching their faces carefully. Thomas invested his savings to keep this farm alive during the drought years. Money that was never repaid. Money that should have made him a partner, not just a brother. David's lawyer mask slipped completely. How do you know about that? Because Grandpa kept records. Everything, including the real reason your father never came back. I led them to the kitchen table where I'd spread out all the evidence. Bank records, letters, photographs, and both wills. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating decades of family secrets like dust motes in the air. Your father was cheated, I said simply. Grandpa knew it, and it ate at him for 40 years. That's why he wrote the first will, the one leaving the farm to all three of us. He was trying to make amends for what he'd done to Thomas. Rebecca picked up one of the old photographs, her eyes softening as she looked at her father as a young man. He never told us any of this. We thought he just didn't care about the farm. He cared too much, I replied. That's why it hurt so badly when Grandpa pushed him out. But here's the thing. I've been thinking about this all night and I've come to a decision. David leaned forward, his eyes sharp with anticipation. What kind of decision? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 3 generations pressing down on my shoulders. The farm should be divided equally. Your father's investment, his sweat, his dreams, they're part of this land's history. Ignoring that would make me no better than Grandpa was. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears while David looked stunned. But, I continued, I have conditions. This land doesn't get sold to developers. It stays a farm. If you want your inheritance, you become partners in keeping this place alive, or you sell your shares to someone who will. David's face hardened. You can't dictate what we do with our property. Actually, I can. Because I'm the one who's been maintaining it, improving it, and building its value for 22 years. And I know things about this place that you'll never learn in a boardroom. Let me show you something, I said, standing up from the table. Before you make any decisions about selling this place, you need to understand what you'd be destroying. I led them outside into the crisp morning air. The wheat fields stretched endlessly in every direction, golden stalks swaying in the breeze like a living ocean. In the distance, the old windmill turned slowly, its blades catching the sunlight. This isn't just farmland, I explained, walking toward the fields. This is an ecosystem, home to dozens of species of birds, small mammals, insects that pollinate crops for miles around. The soil here has been carefully maintained for over a century. No chemical pesticides, crop rotation that keeps it healthy and productive. Rebecca stumbled slightly in her heels, and I noticed her looking around with something that might have been wonder. I had no idea it was so vast. Your father helped plant some of these trees, I said, pointing to a line of oaks that served as a windbreak. Grandpa told me that once, during one of his more honest moments. Thomas wanted to create something that would last generations. We walked to the old barn, its weathered boards still solid after decades of storms. Inside, the smell of hay and leather filled the air. David ran his hand along one of the support beams, his expression thoughtful. The craftsmanship is incredible, he admitted. They don't build things like this anymore. Because nobody takes the time, I replied. Everything's about quick profits and cutting corners. But this place, it's built to last, built to matter. I could see the conflict playing out on their faces. The money from a development deal would solve their immediate problems, but standing here, surrounded by their father's legacy, the decision wasn't as simple as they'd thought. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Rebecca asked if she could help with the evening chores. David looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but I handed her a pair of work gloves and led her to the chicken coop. I've never done anything like this before, she admitted, watching nervously as the hens pecked around her feet. It's not complicated, I said, demonstrating how to collect eggs. Just be gentle and confident. They can sense fear. She laughed, the first genuine sound I'd heard from her since they'd arrived. I'm definitely afraid. These things have beaks. As we worked, she began to talk. About her divorce, about feeling lost and disconnected from anything real, about how her father had always seemed sad when he looked at old photographs, though she'd never understood why. He used to talk about the smell of fresh hay, she said quietly. I thought it was just nostalgia for his childhood, but being here, I think it was grief for something he'd lost. David joined us as we were finishing up, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a borrowed work shirt. The lawyer called, he said, about the development deal. My heart sank. And? I told them we weren't interested. He paused, looking out over the fields. At least not yet. I think we need to understand what we're inheriting before we decide what to do with it. Rebecca nodded, cradling a warm egg in her palm like it was made of gold. I want to learn about this place, about what Dad loved enough to invest his life savings in. For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. David, despite his city softness, threw himself into farm work with surprising determination. His hands blistered from handling tools, and his back ached from bending over crops, but he kept going. Rebecca proved to have a natural talent for the more delicate work, tending the vegetable garden, caring for the animals, keeping detailed records of everything we did. I never realized how much science was involved, David said one evening as we sat on the porch, exhausted but satisfied. The soil composition, the weather patterns, the timing of everything. It's like running a complex business except your office is the entire outdoors. And your success depends on things you can't control, I added. Weather, market prices, diseases, pests. You learn to work with uncertainty, to plan for the worst and hope for the best. Rebecca was studying the old farm ledgers, tracing her finger down columns of numbers that told the story of good years and bad ones. Look at this, she said, pointing to entries from the 1970s. Dad's investments weren't just money. He was buying feed during the drought, paying for veterinary care, covering the mortgage when the crops failed. He was keeping the farm alive, David realized. Not just investing in it, saving it. I nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction at their growing understanding. That's what family does, real family. You don't just share the profits, you share the risks, the work, the responsibility. As the sun set behind the wheat fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I saw something in their faces that hadn't been there before. Connection. Purpose, the beginning of love for this land that had claimed 3 generations of our family. So what happens now? Rebecca asked quietly. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Now we figure out how to make this work. Together. 3 weeks later, we sat in the same lawyer's office where this whole mess had started, but the atmosphere was completely different. David had drawn up partnership papers that split the farm 3 ways, but with carefully crafted provisions that protected the land's agricultural use. The development company isn't going to be happy, the lawyer warned. They've been counting on this deal. Let them be unhappy, Rebecca said firmly. This land isn't for sale, not to developers anyway. We'd spent hours working out the details. David would handle the business and legal aspects from his office in the city, using his law background to navigate regulations and find new markets for our crops. Rebecca was planning to move to the area, taking over the day-to-day management and bringing fresh ideas about sustainable farming and agritourism. "I want to start a farmer's market," she explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "And maybe offer farm tours, show people where their food actually comes from. There's a whole movement of people wanting to reconnect with the land." I would remain as the senior partner, the keeper of institutional knowledge, the one who understood the rhythms and secrets of this particular piece of earth. It felt right, honoring the past while building toward the future. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a document I'd prepared. "I want to establish a memorial fund in Thomas's name, for young farmers who need help getting started. It seems like the right way to honor what he contributed here." David's eyes filled with tears, the first real emotion I'd seen from him since this all began. He would have liked that. Dad always believed in giving people a chance to prove themselves. The lawyer looked confused by our obvious satisfaction with an arrangement that left us all with less money than we could have had. But some things matter more than money. 6 months later, the farm was bustling with activity I hadn't seen since I was a child. Rebecca had moved into the renovated farmhouse, bringing energy and laughter to rooms that had been quiet too long. David visited every weekend, trading his suits for work clothes and learning to read the subtle signs that told us when crops were ready for harvest. The farmers' market was a huge success, drawing families from 3 counties who wanted fresh, locally grown produce. Children ran between the stalls while their parents bought vegetables that had been picked that morning, their faces bright with the simple pleasure of food that tasted the way food was supposed to taste. "Your grandfather would be proud," Rebecca said one evening as we watched the sunset from the porch. She'd found his old rocking chair in the barn and restored it to its former glory. "I think he would," I agreed. "He made mistakes, but in the end, he trusted me to do the right thing, even when the right thing was harder than the legal thing." David emerged from the house carrying a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. "I have news," he announced. "The Memorial Fund approved its first grant, a young couple from Iowa who want to start an organic farm. They'll be visiting next month to learn from us." I felt a deep satisfaction settle into my bones. This was how it was supposed to work. Knowledge passed down, traditions honored, the land cared for by people who understood its value beyond mere dollars and cents. As the stars appeared overhead, the same stars that had watched over generations of Hartwells working this soil, I realized that sometimes losing something forces you to discover what you really have. We'd almost lost the farm to greed and misunderstanding, but in fighting to save it, we'd found something more valuable than any development deal could offer. We'd found family, real family, the kind built on shared purpose and mutual respect rather than just shared blood. 1 year after David and Rebecca first appeared in that cloud of dust, we gathered again around Grandpa's old kitchen table, but this time we were celebrating. The farm had its most profitable year in decades. The Memorial Fund had helped establish 3 new farms, and Rebecca's agritourism business was booked solid through the next growing season. "I have something for you both," I said, pulling out 2 small wooden boxes I'd crafted in the workshop during the winter months. Inside each box was a small vial of soil from the farm, along with a photograph of their father working alongside Grandpa in the early days. "This is your inheritance," I explained. "Not just the legal documents or the bank accounts, but this, the actual earth that your father loved, the legacy he helped build. Wherever life takes you, you'll always carry a piece of this place with you." Rebecca held her vial up to the light, the dark soil rich with decades of careful cultivation. I never understood why Dad kept that old photograph of him and Grandpa on his desk. He looked so young, so hopeful. Now I know. He was remembering the best version of himself. David nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "We almost threw this away for money. We almost destroyed the very thing Dad sacrificed to preserve." But you didn't, I reminded them. When it mattered, when you understood what was really at stake, you chose love over profit. That's what family does. Outside, the wheat fields rustled in the evening breeze, ready for another harvest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to honor the trust that had been placed in our hands. But tonight, sitting around this old table with my newfound family, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done right by those who came before and those who will come after. The farm would endure. The legacy would continue. And somewhere, I like to think, Grandpa Joe was smiling,